Frannie is an intuitive eating nutritionist, disordered eating coach, and master of NLP and hypnosis. She is also a 10-year eating disorder survivor who healed herself from clinically diagnosed anorexia nervosa and bulimia. Through her work in understanding the psychology of food and holistic nutrition, she now uses these tools to help clients from around the world to find the same peace with food. She is committed to living the life of true food freedom, which she swears has been pivotal and transformative from self-shame and hate to real body confidence. Her community goes nuts for her clear, simple, and hilarious teaching style in Frannie's Food Freedom Signature Coaching Program, without having to count a single calorie or macro again. Hi, Frannie. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. You're joining all the way from Cambodia, and we were able to find a time that worked with the 11-hour time difference.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we can do this and I can be part of this even from halfway across the world.
Yeah, well, thank you for getting up nice and early. Obviously, it's a little bit later here, but in order to make it work, so I appreciate that. So, Frannie, you are known as an intuitive eating nutritionist. So if we can start off and you can just talk a little bit about like what exactly is an intuitive eating nutritionist? What do you do?
Yeah, so I get a lot of questions like this, but basically an intuitive eating nutritionist works generally with people who have disordered eating to kind of repair their behavior around food so that they can come back to kind of that baseline of where we start off. We were all kind of born intuitive eaters. We knew when we were hungry, stopped when we were full, ate the things that we pleased, and kind of ignored the things that we didn't. And this is something we did as kids very innately. It's part of who we are. But then somewhere along the way, we started to pick up beliefs, patterns, behaviors around food that started to block our ability to really tap into that intuition and use those cues and signals to guide us. So essentially, I'm just helping people get back to that kind of baseline so that they can live a healthier life without the disordered eating continuously blocking them from making healthy choices for themselves. And if you've ever had disordered eating or an eating disorder in the past, anyone watching this, you know how difficult it is to have a balanced relationship with food when it's the only thing on your mind and you're trying to lose weight or obsessed with dieting and all these kinds of things. So I generally work with a population, I'd say a majority are women, but just basically teaching them how to understand their bodies better. And yeah, I think it's just such a powerful tool if you've spent years of really not understanding those kind of signals and not being able to trust your body anymore.
In your experience, Frannie, what leads to disordered eating? So let's say, what is really at the core of disordered eating?
So I feel like at the core of these kind of disordered behavioral patterns around food is like a whole range of emotions, potentially even trauma, control issues, using food as coping mechanisms, all these kinds of things that kind of underlie the disordered eating. And so it's never actually about the food. It's really about how we're using the food to deal and cover up and suppress all these kind of issues that lie at the core of the disordered and dysfunctional relationship with food. Because you eat 3 times a day, and so you have to face this relationship 3 times a day. And so if at the core of that you're using food, let's say for example, to deal with stress, then it's like every time that you feel stressed, you're going out and buying some ice cream or whatever you connect that mentally to. And so at the core of your eating, it's like maybe you do actually want to make positive choices for yourself, but you find yourself binging every night on ice cream because it provides you a sense of comfort. And so I always say this when I work with clients, it's really never about the food, even though we talk about food so much. That's actually not what's at the base or at the core of the issue. And it's usually like a number of things can be, but mainly what I see is that there is a fear or like a trauma or a need for control that's underlying. And so that bleeds into everything that that person then does with food. So yeah, I think we think of it sometimes, especially if you're a normal eater, or if if you classify yourself as a normal eater and have never struggled with an eating disorder or disordered eating. I think it's hard to kind of see it from that perspective. Like, it's more than just the food, it's also your thoughts, behaviors, your patterns. Have you been restricting, have you been dieting for a long time, or do you feel free around food, do you feel comfortable around food? A lot of people fear food, a lot of people fear eating around others, and so at the core of all of these things, it comes back to the same range of 5, 6, 7 different issues. But it just manifests in so many different ways. And so I can have clients who are binge eaters, clients who are purging or restricting or whatever it is, but all of their core issues are very, very similar.
Okay. And how would someone tell the difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder? And is disordered eating still a concern? Or is that more of like a normal behavior compared to an actual eating disorder that we, have classified under certain names?
Yeah, so I guess disordered eating is the spectrum which eating disorders fall usually on the far ends of. So, maybe you're not necessarily in full-blown anorexia nervosa that you get clinically diagnosed with, but you have been restricting, to 1,200 calories for extended periods of time, longer than you should generally be on diets for, right? Um, and that kind of stuff. So disordered eating are like the behavioral patterns that maybe don't necessarily fall, like maybe you don't have all the ticks on the box for one specific eating disorder, but you might have a range of those disordered behavioral patterns, and that's where we have that range of disordered behavior that we call disordered eating. I
So
hope that
like,
makes sense.
could anyone that's, on some sort of a diet, or people that are wanting to try keto or try different diets, like, is that all somewhat on that spectrum then of some disordered eating if they're feeling that they need to set limitations?
Because we have such a pervasive diet culture where these kind of diets are pushed to women as a means for weight loss, generally the intentions behind this dieting is from a disordered place, is from an insecurity around weight gain, it's from wanting to look thin, these kinds of things, right? So but there's a whole range of nutritionists, which I know very well, who practice these kind of diets in a clinical setting or in a healing context, or for to heal specific ailments and that kind of stuff. And so I think we need to look at, like, what is our intention behind it? If you're the type of chronic dieter who's just looking for the next fad, yes, of course that's disordered, right? Because that's not really ever being able to trust your body and finding a diet that kind of works for you. But if you're using it in a clinical context with a nutritionist, or if you are, trying to heal yourself from something specifically, or if you just recognize that a gluten-free diet makes you feel good, like, that's not disordered, right?
Right.
And so I think we just really need to look at, like, what are our core intentions behind doing this, and if we can unpack what those are specifically, and it doesn't end up being something disordered, then that's okay. And I definitely think that there is a place for diets. I'm a holistic nutritionist myself, and I know that there can be so many healing diets for specific symptoms and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's a really slippery slope if you already have the tendency to misuse the diets for things like weight loss, where it becomes obsessive, where it becomes, that your mind starts to control you in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense because yeah, there are some people that will try more of a say it like a keto style diet because it just generally, like, it feels so much better for them. They have less inflammation, they have less bloating.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, when the approach behind it and the mindset behind it is for, caring for your body and doing, giving your body what it is that, seems like your body needs at the time,
Mm.
is obviously, much different than doing it in order to calorie count and to I guess have a different sort of outcome of weight loss or or change
Yeah.
in the body.
And I think we all know someone in our family or an aunt or someone in our environment who's stuck in this kind of diet trap and who's stuck in this cycle of chronically, going from one fad to the next. And these are the kind of people I work with because ultimately we have to look at health as the whole picture. And if we're just looking at diet and exercise, then we're missing everything else. And so if you might be a person who's really, really good at dieting and really good at restriction and really good at, being quote unquote healthy and following these rules and restrictions. But if it's causing you serious, mental health issues and emotional health issues, then how can we say that this diet is healthy anymore? Right. And so that's kind of what I work to address. It's like, are we coming from a place of fear or are we coming from a place of love? Are you ordering that salad at the restaurant because you know that it's just something you're craving today, it's going to make you feel good? Or are you ordering it because you're scared that everything else on the menu has too many calories or, whatever the other fears might be? So that's what I kind of ask my clients to keep in mind. Like, are you doing this from a place of love or are you doing this from a place of fear? And I think that can easily help you identify, okay, this is coming from X or Y.
So, Franny, how would you say that those inner, those emotional, psychological core issues end up affecting the actual physical core?
So, like anything else, I think all things start in the gut as well. And so I think if your relationship to food is disordered and you are constantly, really changing your body's pattern. So for instance, restricting one day and then binging another day and, having inflammatory food one day and then being really healthy the next, I think it really impacts digestion. And I've seen a huge link, especially in people who suffer from purging or suffer from binge eating. I've seen a huge connection between the way digestion is impacted. And this obviously makes a lot of sense because when you're messing around with your digestion so much, obviously your gut is struggling to figure out how to to break things down and how to have this balance within yourself. So I think also these emotional problems that are related to the disordered eating then come hand in hand with like the digestive issues and the physical symptomatology, which is perhaps rooted in the disordered eating rather than we just have a weak digestive system. And then sometimes as soon as you clear the disordered eating, then those things clear up as well. And I think if you are a person who's in that space of dieting and like being quote unquote healthy and like being the health nut and all that stuff, which I have very personal experience with this because when I was in holistic nutrition school, I was still a disordered eater, and so I tried to throw everything at my digestion. I tried to throw enzymes at it, I tried to throw HCl at it, I tried to throw apple cider vinegar at it, all these kinds of things, and nothing was really working because at the core of the digestive issues was the fact that I was disordered eating and that my body was constantly confused and that the signals weren't happening properly because every day was a different thing. And so my body just was not sure what to do anymore with me. And so, yeah, I think before we start like piling on the supplements and piling on the diets and piling on the protocols, it's like, let's first look at, is the relationship to food in general healthy to begin with? So yeah, it's just another aspect that people often kind of overlook and even clinicians overlook, but can really, really impact, digestion. It's huge. And the
Okay.
gut.
Yeah, and it's a more difficult thing to pinpoint, right? When it's not something that you can just send in for some blood work and have it
No.
done when you're
Yeah.
dealing with emotions. So what are some tips that you can give to the people that are watching today, things that they might be able to do to just start improving their relationship with food, with their eating, in order to strengthen their core and strengthen that digestion?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first step to anything is just to take an evaluation of what's not working. Are you spending your days obsessing about food? Are you spending your days, from morning to night having thoughts about food? Are you putting everything into a calorie tracker so that you feel good and comfortable eating? Or, taking an evaluation, like what are my actual behaviors around food and how do they impact me? And kind of coming back to that question again, like, are they from a place of fear? Are they from a place of love? What are my intentions? Just really starting to unpack that, I think, is like the key first step to making any change or making any progress to begin with. And also looking at our relationship to exercise and movement as part of that as well, because if one thing is disordered, chances are we're also using other things in that way as well. And this often happens with our relationship with exercise. We can be over exercising, burning ourselves out, or just generally like start to resent things like the gym because we're not using them in a way that makes us happy and then as a means of self-care. We're using it to restrict weight or to compensate for what we ate. So we need to look at like, what are our intentions behind all these things, and then from there we can start to identify like, where is this coming from? Do you find yourself reaching for food at the end of the day because it's comforting for you? Is food one of your main coping strategies? Do you use it when you're happy, when you're sad, when you're excited? Is it around, like, I know for myself, one thing I had to look at is that I was conditioned really as a child that every time I'm excited and every time I'm celebrating, we'd get dessert. And that's just the way it is, right? And so I had to find ways to reward myself outside of just buying dessert. And so when we can start to evaluate, then we know where the root causes are coming from as we start to like observe ourselves and observe our behavioral patterns. And of course, like, this is something that is kind of difficult to do on our own sometimes. And that's why a guide or, a mentor or a coach can be really helpful, because sometimes it's the hardest to see what we're doing to ourselves. Our amygdala does so many crazy things on a physiological level, which actually can come back to the core of our brain. Our very primitive brain protects us from anything that it deems fearful. And so changing habits is a main one. Yeah. So, either being able to evaluate it yourself or finding help that can help you look at, what is kind of underneath this. And if it is a lot of stuff, if it is trauma related, if it is, 10 years of disordered behavior, then I would 100% suggest enlisting help, because it's hard to unpack all this on our own. But this is kind of what we want to start to do. And then as we start to unravel them, as we start to work on the beliefs that are behind them and really unpack what's going on here, we can then add more things to our toolbox. It's not like we're going to take away food, because if food is your only coping strategy for your entire life, like, taking it away is not going to do you a favor. But instead of your toolbox being only food, then we can start to add other tools in there, like meditation, for instance, or we can add things like joyful movement, like dancing and singing and, having a really good time with movement that doesn't feel like this really kind of boxed in version of health and fitness that revolves around being at the gym or going to these really intense cardio classes or whatever it might be. We can start to add things into our toolbox that make us excited, make us happy, and so that we start to rely on food less and less and less. And this is kind of where the intuitive eating component comes in. So I would definitely suggest, if you haven't read the book Intuitive Eating and you are someone who classifies themselves as maybe having some disordered eating behavior, can be really good to look into. But the intuitive eating process is then like a 10-step journey where you start to unpack diet culture, really go deep into the limiting beliefs blocking you, and giving yourself, ooh, cats.
Oh, all this intuitive eating talk. He's hungry.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Cambodia. If we're really aware of our triggers, then we can start to use different things in our toolbox kind of to deal with what's behind that. And so intuitive eating is one of those methods for me. It is a 10-step journey. And so if you haven't heard about intuitive eating, I definitely suggest picking up the book or starting to educate yourself around that. But this is a 10-week journey I bring my clients through, where we, go back and unpack everything from starting from childhood and the things that they heard about food, because a lot of my clients also had parents who had a disordered relationship with food. And so that can come from there as well. And so we go back and then we work on the limiting beliefs. We work on permission around food. We work on, the rules and regulations we've kind of picked up along the way. For instance, not eating past 8 p.m. or, sugar is bad, and all these things that really hold us back from making choices from a place that's intuitive and listening to our body, rather than all the beliefs that we've picked up from like the external society. So, yeah, going through this 10-step journey is another really big tool in your toolbox. And anything that really helps you connect to your body. A lot of the times we're so disconnected from our body, from our core. Let's come back to that. And we're not really dropped in. And so I used to say, like, it felt like I was living up here in my head, like a floating head, when I had a disordered relationship with food. And that's because my body just felt so uncomfortable to be in. I was not accepting of it. I was not, wanting to feel connected to it at all because I wasn't proud of it. I wasn't, inspired by it or confident in it. And so if you can find an activity that really helps you connect back to your body and listen to the feelings rather than, how it looks aesthetically and how you might be uncomfortable perhaps with the 5 pounds that you gained or the 10 pounds that you're always trying to lose. It's like, how does my body feel? Does my body feel, nourished and, good, and I'm waking up with energy, all these kinds of things. We need to come back to the real reasons why we take care of our bodies to begin with, because we know that they're valuable and they deserve our care. And regardless of what the external looks like, if you feel good on the inside, then nothing else matters as much. And so we're filling our toolbox with these tools that make us feel good inside. And so anything that self-care related can really inspire that. So, for me, I love long baths and I love naked solo dance parties. That really gets me connected to my body, right? But it doesn't have to look like that for everyone. And that's kind of what I help my clients build, is this toolbox so that they don't need to rely on food anymore as their only coping strategy.
That's great. So if people want to learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I have a website, www.franniesfoodfreedom.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Frannie's Food Freedom. You can find me on Facebook, Frannie's Food Freedom Group. And that's pretty much everywhere I've expanded to for now, social media wise. Yeah, and also with today's interview, I am offering a free gift to everyone. It's my What Are You Craving ebook. So that just kind of talks about what's at the root of some of these cravings around food that we feel like maybe we need to suppress, or that's kind of holding us back from living a healthy lifestyle. But getting to address, what is behind that, what's at the core of those cravings, and how can we address it from a different approach than the usual approach of, let's eliminate everything from our house and hope for the best.
Thanks so much, Frannie. The work that you do, it just must reach so many people, because in the field that I'm in, it's constantly. I mean, I don't like to focus on dieting with clients. I like to focus on finding the balance and finding what's right for you, because I'm also a holistic nutritionist as well. So there's that real spiritual component, but I see it all the time with, people that do come into the gym and they're wanting to exercise vigorously and cut calories, and there's just that that chronic wanting to weigh in and check body fat, which I once again don't believe that that's a healthy way to be like scrutinizing all the time.
Yeah.
But it's men, women, all different age ranges. So I think what you're doing is something that can just benefit so many people. So thank you.
Thank you. And that's not to say that we can't ever have this relationship where we do want to go to the gym and hit those markers of, success in terms of that. But it's like, what are we using as those markers of success? If you're using a pair of old jeans to squeeze into to make sure that you feel confident about yourself and, making sure that you're always a size 6 and all these things, then that is what we need to look at and address. What are our kind of core intentions, core wounding that causes these things to happen?
Thank you so much, Frannie, for being here today. And I really hope that from this session that everyone takes some time to really consider their goals and the whys behind, what it is that they're looking to achieve. And I hope that this has given you some insight and impact into, your emotions and how that relates to food and your deeper core health. So thank you, Frannie.